So I'm going to give a quick tour through the asset management function of SunCHECK Machine, what it is and how to use it. I'll also cover sort of some things you might want to consider in your institution when you're setting it up, some tips and things to watch out for, an example of how we're using it at UCLH. So just for a very quick background, at UCLH, we're a varian centre. We've got 4 varian true beams, and a Halcyon, a CT scanner, an HDR unit, an orthovoltage unit, and we've got the whole SunCHECK platform, currently version 5.0, using it for 2 or 3 years now, and a number of integrated SunNuclear devices, the DQ3 and the Profiler, which we use with SunCHECK Machine. Prior to SunCHECK, we used to have our own in-house access database, which had some lovely customizable forms, but terrible ability to trend data and do reports. And also our trust stopped supporting access, and really the staff competency with the database wasn't, in terms of maintaining it, wasn't there anymore. And the UK medical device regulations strongly suggest that if there is a commercially available solution for something you want to do, you should be using that instead of in-house customized software. So we're now entirely based in SunCHECK Machine. So we're using it for all of our QA, just about to roll out for the last module for our TrueBeam QA, which might seem counterintuitive, like why didn't we start with the TrueBeams rather than all the rest of it? But when we started with SunCHECK, this was prior to version 4.3, so there were some limitations to the software back then, in that there were some tests like measuring DLG where we needed to plot and fit graphs, and that functionality wasn't quite there within SunCHECK, so we'd need to use an external spreadsheet and then transcribe data back into SunCHECK, therefore risking transcription errors. We now have that feature in SunCHECK, and Corey's going to talk about that later. But the main reason we didn't start with our true beams is that there wasn't an ability to have a chamber library and be able to pull in calibration factors. So we would have to get the user to enter these themselves, again, risking transcription errors, or somehow embed them into our calculations within the template. And then that poses problems when we do our annual cross calibrations and want to update factors. We then have to find every template that's been used in and update it. So at the time, our risk assessment said, that wasn't a great idea. But now we have this wonderful new feature, well, not so new anymore, called asset management. And it really allows you to build an entire equipment library within SunCHECK. So you can kind of build and customize anything you want to track in this module. So we use it for chambers, electrometers, thermometers, barometers, and our HDR source, but you could use it for anything that you have. And then those assets can be pulled into the machine templates, and any data associated with them can be used within your calculations. So that's what we mainly use it for, but you can be as creative as you want. The functionality is there to create anything as an asset. I think I sort of mentioned that you can actually put people in there as assets and use it as a sort of staff competency database. So you can attach documents to that member of staff showing evidence for their competencies, and you can set expiries for their competency, for the different competencies, and keep track of things like that. So you can be as creative as you want with it. So the assets are managed within the main asset workspace. It's just access from the main menu on the left-hand side. And assets are really built up from different building blocks, which are categories, components, types, and vendors. So this is a very basic schematic sort of showing how that works. Categories are just a text label. They can be anything. So in our center, we've used it to delineate between different types of equipment. So we have ionization chambers and barometers, etc. But I've seen it be used where if you have different sites, you could have site 1, site 2, and then keep track of what equipment you have where. And then you can have types within that category. So we've got different types of ionization chamber, for example. And a type is really built up from different components, and that's where the data associated with your asset sits. So for our ionization chambers, we have expiry dates and calibration factors. We also have strontium-90 reference data that we can add in and use for those checks. And vendors is just another text label that you can add and filter your assets by. So these are some examples of components that we've created. They're mainly kind of expiry dates and calibration factors with a few other things thrown in that I'll explain as we go along. Components are made up of different fields. Fields can be 3 different types. So you can have a simple text entry and a numeric input. So this would be where you deal with your calibration factors. So if you have a chamber that is calibrated for multiple energies, you can create a data table with all those different calibration factors for that one chamber within it. And then there's the date picker. So this is where you can deal with your expiry dates. But the nice thing about the date picker is you can set rules. So you can add warnings and blocks to your asset. In this example, we set up a warning. So 30 days before the calibration expires, the user will see a message warning them it's going to expire. And we can actually stop the asset from being used. You can set the date for that with a block. I mean, for us, we have our calibration schedule is a year plus or minus a month. So we've given this kind of 30-day leeway on the calibration factor before it actually blocks and stops that being used. If you do trigger a warning, those assets with warnings or blocks will then sit at the top of your asset list. So this is a really nice way of being able to manage what calibrations are due and coming up. It's quite clearly shown here, and the user will see a warning if they try to use that asset in a template. So that message that you've put in will pop up there for them, or the asset will be blocked. So in this way, we can start building components. They can have multiple fields. So this example shows a calibration factor component, which has the calibration factors and the expiry date. And then we can use these component building blocks to build up an equipment type. So here we've got a farmer chamber to which we've added 3 different components. So the strontium data, the factors, and the serial number. And then when you create your asset, you're simply assigning a type, and then it will pull in the associated components that you've set up. One nice feature is this file edition. So you can add all your calibration certificates there if you want, or possibly work instructions on how to cross-calibrate that piece of equipment. And you can also decide whether this asset is active or inactive, so whether it's available in your templates or not. You can edit assets. There's a nice feature where you can see the past history of an asset. So if you want to go back 2 years and see what calibration factors were being used at the time, you can look at an old version of an asset. Sorry. And it will warn you that you're not looking at the current one. So you're aware of what you're looking at. So it's all really easy to set up. It does take a bit of thinking at the start about what structure you want to use for your kind of asset database. It's worth taking some time to plan at the beginning. And a word of caution that anyone can edit an asset. So especially here where I'm using it for calibration factors, that's quite important. How do we control that data? So it's something to consider within your own department, how you're going to manage that process. So we don't have a QA process where we check the integrity of a template or whether the asset itself has been edited. So, I mean, you could go in every week, every month and check that everything is okay, but that's quite labor intensive. So instead, we make our user look up the calibration factor in our external quality system and enter it, and our results just check that against the factor that's being pulled in from the asset workspace. And that's a process that was built into the way we do things before SunCHECK. We always get people to second check and look things up. So our users are perfectly used to that. But yeah, you need to think about how you're going to control that asset data. So then we've got our assets. They're really simple to implement within your templates. All you need to do is create a parameter in the setup and assign it as a type of asset. And then you'll have all your different asset types available, which you can assign. And then all your components will be available to select and pull into that template. So that was, we only use custom tasks at UCLH, but if you're using a non-custom task off the shelf, you'll see these little icons where it wants some asset data associated with it. And if you select that, you can then just map your asset parameters to the field parameters in your template. It's very easy. And then this is just what the user sees. They're able to see all the assets of that type in a drop-down menu when they run the task. So this is just a magnified view because it's a bit small. So when they select a chamber, you can see there are fields next to it which have this little chain link symbol and an A. And that means that that field's linked to the asset. So when you select the chamber, these will populate automatically. I just wanted to highlight here, it might seem a bit redundant. We have components for serial numbers when the serial number is actually in the chamber name. But we've designed this on purpose. We found that if you're looking at a custom report, it cannot see the information in this drop-down menu. So if you want to bring in information about the asset, you need to make sure that you have a component that it's pulling in. So that's where we have what seems like a redundant component here for serial number, because we wanted to pull it into a custom report. So we've seen so far, we've mainly used asset management as a chamber library, but it also has really useful functionality if you've got lots of repeated data entry, because we know that there's one frustration with SunCHECK is that one template can't talk to another. So you sometimes have to transcribe data between one and another. And a prime example of that for us is when we get a new HDR source. We have two teams come in and measure the reference air kerma rate, and they're both comparing it back to the source certificate. And then an average of that is calculated and put into our planning system. And then that average value is compared against when we do our monthly reference air kerma measurement rate. So we're getting a lot of repeated entry of the source certificate calibration time and the measured time at source acceptance. So our process is that the first team come in and they create a new source with all this data in it that can then be pulled in at each subsequent time when like at monthly QA, and for the session 2 people to be able to pull this in and use it within the template. And we have our source then expires 3 months in the future at the date of the next source exchange. So then that source is blocked and we can't use it anymore, and a new source is created. So this is just an example in practice, someone of our monthly QA where they pull in the source and all the data they need for the calculations is just brought in, rather than them having to go back to the source exchange template and find what was measured and transcribe it across.